Okay. So I'm live. Thank you for those of you who are watching this. Thank you for those of you who are coming at a later time to take a look at this. I know it's early for East Coast, U.S. East Coast viewers, which is where I normally am. I'm still traveling for another week. You know, the reason I'm doing this live is because I really wanted to process a little bit more some of the writing that I've been doing this week. And this week I've had a theme of what walking reveals. And I've been thinking about this from an eco spirituality lens perspective. And thanks for those of you who are able to join once again. Feel free to put any comments in or questions either as I'm talking about this today, or even if you're watching the recording of it. Pesky English words here. So um, what I really want to talk about today is I want to talk about one of the posts that I did this week, and that how it really expands, if you will. I'm talking about grief, and I'm talking about specifically grief connected with the natural world. And I did a post on the grief that knows your name. And I said specific grief is sustainable, but generalized despair isn't. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that and to process this. And quite honestly, I'm not an expert on grief, and I don't really know how many people who are experts on grief, specifically experts on grief related to the environmental crisis, the ecosystem collapse, just the disaster that we're causing. Many of us who aren't necessarily causing it, we're experiencing it, though we all play a role because we are all connected with this. And so from this perspective, this is a coming from a contemplative perspective. This is difficult content. There is no right answer that I've been able to find. So, in many ways, my writing this piece and all of the pieces that I write on Substack, there's a little sense of me trying to process some of this as I write along with it. So, from that perspective, I wrote this piece about grief, um, specifically that comes from an experience that I wrote about on a longer post about a Christmas tree. I was going for a hike, and I was really disturbed in this 8.5 mile hike that I did a couple weeks back. I'm really disturbed with this discarded Christmas tree. Now, I live in cities. I see discarded Christmas trees every January. There's nothing unusual about this. But what bothered me here, and I think why this really stuck with me, and it still reverberates with me, is this was in a park. This was a discarded Christmas tree that was brought into a park because I was walking around the park, very large park in Paris. But I was walking around the park, and it just had never struck me before, the idea of kind of killing a Christmas tree, so you bring it inside for a week or 2 or 3 or however long it is. You celebrate the New Year, you celebrate Christmas, which is all about new life, and then you toss the tree out, right? Not even to be discarded for, um, mulching or anything like that. You literally throw it into a park, which in many ways is a broken circle of life, because the tree could have easily have lived in the park. It likely didn't, but it could have easily lived in the tree in a park, and it's thrown in the middle of this park where there are living trees around it, and this juxtaposition, just kind of the um, really got me this time. It really, um, it hit me in a way that I hadn't been really struck with before, in part because I was starting my walk reflecting on a mantra. I was reflecting on a personal rule of life. So I'm already thinking about this. May I connect with ancestor wisdom, maybe aligned with it. May I think about transformation through walking. I had these ideas kind of going through my head, and lo and behold, I come upon this tree, and it related me back to an experience of a tree that I used to visit for years. I visited this tree in a large garden here, where I named him Herman. I'm not sure if I named him or if he told me his name. I don't know. Somehow Herman seemed to fit, so that's what he was. And I spent quite a bit of time with this tree over the years as the tree was slowly dying. I have no idea why. The tree was in a formal garden. I cannot imagine the groundskeepers allowing the tree to die because of something that could have been prevented, because all of the trees around it and the garden and everything around it was very much teeming with life. I think in that sense, the groundskeepers often took very good care, or as much as possible, of the trees there. So something else was happening there. I don't know what else was happening. Something was happening with Herman, this tree. And when I found that Herman had actually died, I'd spent some time with Herman. I spent time as we do with those who are dying that we're close to. And the next time that I visited, which was 2 months later or something like that, as I can't always get here, it's in Paris, and usually in New York. Not only was Herman dead, but Herman was gone. There was no sign that Herman ever even lived there. They did such an effective and efficient way of removing him. Likely they mulched him, which is what they tend to do, so he could go on in the cycle of life. But there wasn't even a stump. It was just removed as if Herman had never existed there. And I really treasured this moment. But I grieved the tree. I grieved Herman. I grieved that. I honored this tree that had lived and had a relationship with me. As all living beings can have relationship with one another. And I even spent some time with the remaining trees around him, who all seemed fine, but likely trees because their roots are connected. There was a sense of a loss. I imagine that was the case. And as a university chaplain, I work with students and faculty and folks who experience loss and often don't know where to turn. They don't know how to experience it, right? There's not a, here, read this. This is the loss guide. Those things don't really exist. Um, so, in working with students who are experiencing this global sense of loss, right? Of knowing that their children are going to come into a world that is much worse environmentally than we are right now. How do you deal with that? How do you even talk about that? And, you know, often my students in having symptoms of environmental grief, the grief is just too large. It's just too large, right? We can't really grieve like the death of the coral reefs, which will have enormous impact on humanity just because of the oxygen that they create, if nothing else, right? And in the fish that then eat on the small things that live there, right? It's going to have huge repercussions. Um, and we can't really grieve that kind of enormous loss. That's really despair, right? In despair just becomes almost hopelessness. So what I try to do, and I do this even from my own experience, is let's see if we could grieve something more specific, something that's a little bit not like overly large that our minds can't really conceive of it. So I can't grieve the loss of a rainforest. It's just beyond what any one person could grieve. That becomes despair of the loss of the rainforest. But I can grieve the death of this one tree. This one tree where I had a connection. I can have a direct connection and then grieve that loss. And and in naming that loss of one specific a living being, one species, one place, one something specific that we have some sort of connection with, we could get specific, and then it's a little bit easier to carry that loss because there are boundaries to it. And those boundaries then allow us to wrap our minds around it a little bit more than just this loss that's kind of beyond what any one person can really understand. Um, so in that way, when we grieve more, we often care more, right? So in grieving something very specific, we become sensitized to it and to other things like it. And that helps us to care more. We could grieve in a way that we become more engaged, where the despair just disconnects us, right? Because it's just hopeless. There's nothing I could do. This is just hopeless. I can't have children. I can't do anything. Humanity's doomed. That kind of stuff. And you've probably heard people talk about this, and how do you answer that? How do you answer that? So I'm trying to bring this down to something specific which is doable, something specific which is connectable, which is relatable. Because while we are all, as living beings, connected in an interconnected world, my mind can't really cope with what that looks like on a vast scale. But I can connect with loved ones. I can connect with ones I live with. I can connect with the ones that I care for, with the ones that I see every day. And think about when you were likely a child, there was likely some sort of a tree that you like to climb, or something, a rock you like to hide behind, or whatever it might have been. Even those of us who live in urban environments, right? There's still something that we're able to connect to. And sometimes just bringing our minds back to that makes it a little bit more doable, right? Because then we could grieve the loss of that if that indeed has happened, as opposed to all changes or clear cutting of entire forests. As horrible as that is, I'm not minimizing that. But my mind can't really cope with that on a large scale that really spirals towards a despair. So a couple of practices that I could try to recommend, or I could try to not even recommend, even offer, right? A couple practices I could try to offer for those who are maybe trying to work through some of these things. Um, Walk through your neighborhood, whatever that might be, whether it's an urban, whether it is suburban, whether it is rural, or even something different. Walk through the neighborhood and notice something that is struggling, something that's alive, that's struggling in some way. Maybe it's damaged, or maybe it's even gone, like a tree that was recently, dead. It fell over, maybe it was struck by lightning, or maybe it was cut down, or what have you. Something very, very specific, and stand there with it, right? Learn its name, engage with it. If it's living still, it's a little bit easier. But if it's not, that's okay. You're still giving witness to its life. Because while there might be the perception of, ooh, this is getting a little too woo woo, think about it this way: everything which is alive, we could connect with. And if you're not sure, you probably never had a dog or a cat as a pet, right? Because that's really where many of us learn connecting with the living worlds, right? When we have that dog or cat or pet, sometimes we call them fur friends or fur babies, right? The different terms we could use. But anyway, stand and try to connect in some way with that living being, or that recently non-living being. That one that might have been cut down, or might have been dead or deceased in some way. Let yourself feel what arises for you. Remember, we're going out, we're looking to connect with something, noticing just what strikes us, and then go with it, stand with it, learn a little bit more about it. Maybe see what feelings might arise in you and just allow them. Don't try to get rid of them, just allow them and just see what happens. Just see what happens. And if you have that sense of grief, okay, sit with it. Sit with that sense of grief. Don't get overwhelmed with it, because it's with one specific being. And you might be surprised at how that grief with that one being is still holdable. And while we could frame it, not box it in, but we could, right? I could understand the grief with a specific tree, or the loss of something very specific. That doesn't mean it's necessarily easy, but it's not despair. Despair is beyond our ability to cope with, beyond our ability. And from this perspective, what I would invite you to just consider as you might be experiencing this is, the planet, humanity, all living beings, we don't need despair. Despair doesn't help anything. We need a specific, heartbroken, relational love. I'm still learning this. I'm still trying to practice this, and part of my writing is really to explore this. And in this way, what I would invite you to do is, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. I would love to hear how it goes. Were you able to experience it? What specific loss might have come to you that does know your name, because it's specific? It's not despair. It's very, very specific. And have you noticed anything that might have arisen from you in this way, um, that might differentiate that specific grief from a almost generalizable climate anxiety, something which is like more despair like. Because in this invitation, I'm trying to invite you to think about and relate with something specific as opposed to relate with something which is vast and beyond our ability, quite honestly, to relate with, and that's where the challenge is. We can't relate with something which is unrelatable, like something vast. We can only relate with something specific, and in relating with that something specific, what would you grieve? What does that grief look like? And how can you stay engaged with it without being crushed or without being overwhelmed? Now, there's no right or wrong answer, and I'm just doing this as an invitation. But all of us face grief of some sort, right? Whether it's a grief of a loved one, it's a grief of the death of an idea, or some sort of change which is beyond our control, but it's something that we can relate with. And that's key here, to be able to relate with something, because in that way, often it helps to sensitize us. And when we're sensitized, then we could take action. Then we could try to bring good into the world in some way because we're sensitized and we want to try to bring something positive out of this event that really stirs us in some sort of a way that invites us towards transformation. So I'm really, really interested in how you make sense of this and if this made any sense at all. Right? So even if you don't try something, I would love to get your thoughts on this. So thank you so much. And I wish you all good things today and on the days to come. Thank you.